"You're not competent enough. We don't need someone like you anymore." That was it. The last thing I heard from my old company. As if they'd just slammed a door on a chapter of my life without even bothering to knock. I stood there frozen, the fluorescent office lights glaring down like tiny suns mocking me, and for a moment, I felt invisible, like a poorly rendered background character in someone else's story. Funny thing is, that word incompetent bounced around in my head long after my ears had stopped hearing it, making my own heartbeat sound like a drumline marching out of sync. Walking out that day, my briefcase felt absurdly heavy. Maybe it wasn't the weight of files, but the sudden awareness that everything I thought defined me, my skills, my effort, my quiet reliability, had been deemed worthless. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing happened. Cars honked, people chatted, coffee shops poured out aromatic steam. Even the sunlight seemed smug, streaking across the sidewalk as if saying, "Well, better luck next time, champ." It was surreal how a single dismissal could shrink a world I had thought so vast into a pocket-sized nightmare. That evening, I wandered through streets crowded with strangers, each face a reminder that life continued, indifferent to my collapse. My apartment key rattled in my pocket like a tiny warning bell, and my phone's silence was louder than any insult. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I let out a quiet laugh, part disbelief, part irony. There I was, a supposed failure, reduced to a one-person tragedy in a studio apartment, while the universe seemed to watch with a sly grin. Even my cat regarded me with mild contempt, as though agreeing silently that yes, indeed, I was spectacularly useless. Making a cup of tea that night, I watched the steam curl upward in hypnotic spirals. It was strangely soothing, almost ASMR-like, calming the storm of embarrassment in my chest. Everything felt exaggerated, the clink of the spoon in the mug, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant wail of a siren. Small, mundane things suddenly held weight, proof that life wasn't entirely over. I began to realize that perhaps being called useless wasn't an end, but a nudge, a cosmic poke urging me to reassess, restart, rebuild. Sleep came in fractured waves, bringing dreams of boardrooms I hadn't yet conquered, charts that refused to make sense, and colleagues who smirked from behind mahogany desks. When I woke, a bitter thrill lingered in my mouth, like black coffee mixed with dark chocolate, and it whispered a dangerous thought: "You can turn this." That flicker of defiance, tiny but persistent, became the seed of something else, opportunity dressed as failure. By the next morning, I had a plan, or at least the skeleton of one. Rebuild quietly, observe, learn, and grow from scratch. Perhaps one day I'd walk past my old office building and smile at the memory of those who had dismissed me. But for now, survival required small victories. A notebook, a pen, and a corner of a bustling cafe became my war room. Every note I scribbled was a tiny rebellion, each idea a bite-sized revenge against the label of incompetence. As I left the cafe, the city seemed transformed, or perhaps it was me. Every pedestrian felt like a story, every honking taxi a heartbeat in my rising rhythm. Life had a strange sense of irony. Humiliation could taste like opportunity if you let it steep long enough. Taking a deep breath, I let the absurdity of it all wash over me, savoring the faintly bitter flavor of instant coffee and ambition mingled together. It was the first. Starting over from scratch is a peculiar kind of therapy. There's a rawness to it, a mixture of fear and thrill that pulses through your veins every morning when you wake up with nothing but possibilities, and a bank account that whispers, "Good luck, buddy." I rented the tiniest apartment I could find, a place so small that the walls seemed to lean in conspiratorially, as if mocking my ambition. The air smelled faintly of damp carpet and old paint, but somehow, it felt like the perfect incubator for reinvention. My first few days were spent simply existing, making meals that barely qualified as edible, pacing the narrow living room while rehearsing my own pep talks, and staring at the blank walls as if they were canvases waiting for the art of my comeback. I devoured books, webinars, articles, anything that could turn me into someone who deserved the word competent. The local library became my secret headquarters. Each visit a mission into the past successes of people who had been dismissed and yet had risen again. I took meticulous notes, my handwriting occasionally devolving into chaotic scribbles when inspiration hit, or when caffeine-induced jitters demanded attention. Watching my own progression felt like playing a video game on expert mode. Each completed level bringing a little surge of satisfaction, even if the reward was nothing more than a pat on my own back. I started to believe that perhaps the word useless wasn't permanent. Perhaps it was just a challenge disguised as an insult. Money was tight, so every day was a careful negotiation with reality. Instant noodles became gourmet dinners with a sprinkle of imagination. Soy sauce as magic dust, a single fried egg as haute cuisine. I laughed quietly to myself while cooking, imagining my former manager's face if they knew that survival meant elevating something as humble as noodles into a tiny, triumphant feast. Laundry became a luxury, and my cat, who I had to admit was beginning to enjoy being my sole audience, occasionally pawed at my notebooks as if approving my grand chaotic plans. There's a subtle, almost ASMR-like satisfaction in the rhythm of chores when life has been stripped down to essentials. The clatter of dishes, the swish of a broom, even the gentle hum of my laptop fan became comforting companions in my slow, deliberate reconstruction. Networking felt like navigating a labyrinth. I reached out to old colleagues who had quietly expressed dissatisfaction with the company, mentoring them in small, strategic ways while quietly gauging their potential as allies. Coffee dates, casual lunches, even a shared laugh over a failed presentation, all became part of an unspoken alliance forming in the shadows. Every person I connected with felt like a building block for a larger, unseen structure, and each conversation added fuel to a fire I refused to show too openly. Subtlety, I realized, was an art form. Sometimes the most effective moves are the ones no one sees coming. I also took note of the company that had dismissed me, not with obsession, but with curiosity, observing their patterns, their weaknesses. The tiny cracks in the armor of their supposedly perfect operation became an intellectual sport. Their overconfidence, their reliance on routines, their blind spots, it was almost poetic. Each discovery made my pulse quicken, a little thrill that came not from malice, but from clarity. I began to chart out strategies in my notebooks, ideas that seemed impractical at first, but slowly, methodically, each note became a blueprint. The process was mesmerizing, like watching a plant grow from seed to sprout in accelerated time. I was building something entirely my own, one careful, deliberate step at a time. By the end of the month, I had something that resembled a structure, a rudimentary plan, a makeshift team of trusted friends and freelancers, and an inner fire that burned hotter with each passing day. I allowed myself a tiny victory, a proper dinner, a clean apartment, a moment of quiet pride before the world woke up. Sitting on the edge of my bed, sipping lukewarm tea, I let a soft smile curl my lips. I was no longer just a discarded employee. I was a student of my own life, a clandestine architect of my future empire, and I was starting to enjoy the process. The hum of the city outside my window became a steady rhythm, almost like a heartbeat syncing with my own. Each honk, each distant shout, each passing footstep felt like part of a symphony that underscored my efforts. And as I drifted to sleep that night, notebook closed beside me, I felt the first taste of anticipation, the knowledge that, slowly but surely, I was reclaiming the narrative, one careful, deliberate move at a time. Perhaps, I thought with a quiet smirk, the useless label would someday be the sweetest irony of all. Observing my old company from the sidelines became a subtle sport, almost like birdwatching but with higher stakes and fewer binoculars. I signed up for industry newsletters, casually connected with former colleagues on LinkedIn, and kept an eye on press releases and market movements. It was oddly satisfying to notice patterns they didn't seem to see themselves. The overconfidence in quarterly projections, the hesitance to innovate, the blind spots where opportunities were quietly waiting. Each observation felt like discovering a secret passage in a familiar building, a crack in their polished facade that no one else had noticed, or no one else cared to. I started keeping detailed notes, diagrams, and color-coded charts in a notebook that grew heavier and more chaotic by the week. It was my little treasure trove of insight, a personal playbook for an eventual move I refused to rush. Some might have called it obsessive. I called it preparation. It was a silent rebellion, a quiet, I told you so in the making. Late at night, the hum of my small heater and the clatter of my keyboard became a comforting rhythm, like an ASMR lullaby from my plotting mind. The process of noticing and documenting gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt since that fateful day of dismissal, a small anchor in the stormy sea of uncertainty. In these moments I also learned to refine my listening skills. Every casual comment from former colleagues, every industry rumor, every social media post was a puzzle piece. I began connecting dots that others ignored, seeing potential alliances and gaps like a chess player scanning the board for the next move. It was thrilling in a quiet, almost addictive way, like solving a mystery while everyone else was asleep. Occasionally I chuckled at the absurdity of my own obsession. Who spends their nights stalking the company that fired them? I whispered to myself, but the truth was, I wasn't stalking. I was strategizing. And strategy, I reminded myself, was deliciously satisfying when practiced in secret. Meanwhile, I started experimenting with small entrepreneurial projects, testing my skills on tiny ventures that had little risk but offered big lessons. Freelance contracts, consulting gigs, even a modest e-commerce trial gave me opportunities to sharpen negotiation skills, manage timelines, and observe market behavior firsthand. Each success, no matter how small, felt like a sprinkle of sugar on what had been a rather bitter slice of life. I noticed a pattern forming. My failures were becoming less intimidating because each attempt carried the benefit of learning, each misstep a lesson in disguise. Slowly the word incompetent began to lose its sting, replaced by a quiet confidence that whispered, "You might just be capable enough to surprise them." I also nurtured relationships with people who had been overlooked, undervalued, or simply underestimated. Lunches, casual meetings, and late-night brainstorming calls helped me identify potential allies who shared my ambition and my frustration with the status quo. Together, we built a network that wasn't visible to the outside world, a clandestine team, united by curiosity, intelligence, and a mutual sense of being misunderstood. It was intoxicating, this secret camaraderie, and it felt like I was constructing a private league of superheroes, minus the capes and comic book drama. Each conversation was a brick in a foundation that would, in time, support something far bigger than any of us could accomplish alone. By the end of this phase, I had become a quiet observer, a strategist who thrived on subtlety and patience. My old company, blissfully unaware, continued their routines, confident in their own invulnerability. And that, I realized with a small, satisfied smile, was their greatest weakness. My notebook of insights, my secret alliances, and my experimental ventures were all converging towards something bigger. An eventual confrontation that would be both inevitable and irresistible. I was no longer powerless. I was preparing to rewrite the rules on my terms. Each night, as I lay in bed, I let the quiet satisfaction wash over me. The soft tick of my wall clock, the distant rumble of traffic, and the gentle hiss of the radiator became the soundtrack to my ascent. The thrill of anticipation was tempered by patience, a delicate balancing act that made the process itself enjoyable. And deep down, I knew the day would come when all this quiet observation, all this painstaking preparation, would bloom into something undeniable, proof that I had never been useless at all. Building a team of allies was like assembling a secret society. I reached out to people who had quietly been marginalized, ignored, or underappreciated in their own roles. Those who still carried fire in their eyes despite setbacks, coffee shops, casual lunches, late-night calls, they became our covert council chambers. Each person I brought in contributed a skill, a perspective, or a connection, and slowly, we started to feel like a small but formidable force. It was thrilling, almost addictive, to witness the transformation from isolated frustration to collective strategy. We shared inside jokes, sometimes absurd, sometimes self-deprecating, each laugh cementing the bond that would eventually become the backbone of our operation. Every meeting carried a subtle thrill, an ASMR-like cadence of ideas clattering against one another, creating sparks that hinted at future triumphs. We dissected market trends, analyzed competitors' weaknesses, and even brainstormed small low-risk ventures to test our combined capabilities. Occasionally, someone would make a pun so perfectly ridiculous that we'd laugh until our coffee threatened to escape the rims of our cups. In these moments, I realized that the joy of collaboration was its own kind of power, a soft, unassuming strength that grew quietly but relentlessly. Meanwhile, my attention never wavered from the company that had dismissed me. Each observation, each casual conversation with former colleagues, added pieces to a mental map of opportunity. I noted inefficiencies, gaps in leadership, and blind spots where new strategies could flourish. It was almost poetic. The very institution that had deemed me useless was now teaching me, unintentionally, how to surpass it. And with each revelation, I felt a quiet satisfaction that bordered on mischievous amusement. Life had a subtle sense of humor, and I intended to let it play out to perfection. We began to experiment with small ventures, testing ideas in the marketplace without revealing our broader ambitions. Freelance contracts, consulting projects, even small e-commerce trials gave us real-world data and honed our decision-making. Every success, no matter how modest, became a small victory, proof that our combined expertise could achieve tangible results. Each misstep, meanwhile, was a lesson disguised as failure, a reminder that calculated risks often carried the sweetest rewards. I noticed a shift within myself. The sting of rejection was fading, replaced by a quiet resilience and a sense of growing mastery over my environment. Trust, I discovered, was the most delicate and most powerful currency in building a team. Each person had to feel valued and understood, not merely useful. I listened more than I spoke, allowing ideas to percolate and grow before shaping them into actionable strategies. Occasionally, I'd tease them lightly, making a joke about our underground empire or comparing our fledgling projects to superhero origin stories. These moments of levity kept morale high and reminded us that even the most serious endeavors benefited from humor. After all, if you can laugh quietly while plotting your ascent, you've already mastered half the battle. By the end of this phase, our little network had evolved into a dynamic, cohesive unit. Each member contributed uniquely, filling gaps that might have seemed insignificant at first, but were crucial to our long-term success. We began to speak a shared language, a combination of analytical rigor, creative thinking, and dry humor that became our signature. I could feel the momentum building, subtle but unmistakable, like the low hum of a machine warming up before unleashing full power. And though the world remained oblivious, I knew that in the quiet corners of cafes and tiny offices, we were quietly assembling the foundation of something unstoppable. Evenings became a time of reflection and soft celebration. Sitting back in my apartment, listening to the faint city hum, I would let myself smile quietly, imagining a future where our efforts bore fruit. Each step, no matter how small, was deliberate, intentional, and satisfying. It was an intricate dance of patience and preparation, and I had learned to enjoy the rhythm. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the shadow of my old life began to fade, replaced by a new narrative that I was carefully scripting, one in which the word useless would be nothing more than a distant, ironic memory. The day I officially launched my first company felt like stepping onto a stage I'd spent years building in private. The entity itself was modest, just a handful of employees working from a small, sunlit office that smelled faintly of coffee and ambition, but every corner was infused with possibility. I remember standing in the middle of the room, listening to the soft tapping of keyboards and the occasional hum of a printer, and feeling a surge of quiet pride. The chaos was organized, the energy tangible, and for the first time in months, I felt entirely in control of my own story. The early days were a flurry of activity, equal parts exhilarating and exhausting. Negotiating contracts, pitching to potential clients, and juggling finances demanded a constant focus, and yet I found myself relishing every minute. Each signed deal felt like a small, sweet victory, a sprinkle of sugar on what had once been a rather bitter slice of life. The team celebrated each success with understated excitement, quiet nods, brief smiles, or a single shared laugh over a particularly stubborn spreadsheet error. I even joked once about how our budget couldn't cover a gold-plated stapler, and yet somehow, the humor kept morale alive. These little moments reminded me that building something meaningful wasn't just about profit. It was about creating a culture, even in miniature, that nurtured curiosity, resilience, and creativity. I also kept a close eye on the competition, particularly my old company, without letting it dominate my thoughts. Watching them flounder occasionally due to internal inefficiencies was oddly satisfying, like seeing a slow-motion domino effect unfold. Every small misstep of theirs became a lesson for me, a guidepost for what to avoid, and a subtle reassurance that my meticulous planning was working. I documented everything, as if preparing a secret dossier of insights that might one day prove invaluable. The process was almost meditative. The gentle click of a pen on paper, the rustle of reports, and the soft hum of my laptop created a soothing rhythm, an ASMR-like backdrop to the quiet joy of building my future. Challenges were inevitable, of course. Suppliers delayed shipments, contracts fell through, and technology failed at inconvenient moments. But each obstacle was met with a blend of humor and determination. I joked to my team about how computers seemed to enjoy tormenting humans, or how clients sometimes had a talent for asking the most absurd questions. These small interludes of levity helped maintain focus, reminding us that even under pressure, resilience and perspective were essential. Slowly, we began to find our stride, gaining confidence in our processes, our products, and most importantly, ourselves. As weeks turned into months, our reputation began to grow. Small clients led to larger ones, partnerships emerged, and our modest office started to hum with a quiet, steady energy that suggested momentum. I could feel the excitement building, not just in myself, but in the team that had become my extended family, my collaborators in this carefully orchestrated symphony of growth. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons, and new victories, each one reinforcing the quiet truth that determination, vision, and patience could transform even the humblest beginnings into something substantial. By the end of that first quarter, we had secured a few key contracts that marked our arrival as a credible player in the industry. Sitting in my small office, watching the city lights twinkle through the window, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The journey from being dismissed as useless to leading a company with tangible influence had been arduous, but each step had been deliberate, each setback a lesson, and each small victory a reminder of why perseverance mattered. I smiled quietly to myself, feeling a sense of satisfaction that was soft yet profound, like the warmth of a cup of tea on a cold evening. There was a rhythm to these days now, a subtle harmony of effort, laughter, and strategy. And as I closed my notebook at night, listening to the faint hum of the city below, I realized something remarkable. The person who had been called incompetent was not only surviving but thriving, laying the groundwork for something far larger than I had initially imagined. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that this was only the beginning of the sweet, quiet ascent I had been building toward all along. The first signs that my old company was feeling uneasy came subtly, like the tremor before a distant rumble of thunder. Calls from clients who had previously been loyal to them began trickling into my inbox. Some inquiries seemed almost accidental, polite questions that quickly turned into serious negotiations. Every email carried a twinge of irony. The very organization that had deemed me useless was now indirectly validating my efforts. I smiled quietly to myself, sipping lukewarm coffee, as if the universe had a slightly mischievous sense of humor. Sweet irony, I whispered under my breath, letting the words curl into the soft hum of my office. As the weeks passed, the impact grew more tangible. Contracts that my former company had assumed were secure started slipping through their fingers, subtly redirected to my fledgling enterprise. Each success was a quiet victory, a soft nudge of validation that built on my growing confidence. I allowed myself occasional moments of levity, joking to my team about how my old bosses might need therapy after realizing they're incompetent. The employee had become the competition they couldn't ignore. The satisfaction wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a slow, simmering warmth, like chocolate melting on the tongue after months of waiting. I became adept at using discretion, moving strategically in the background while observing their missteps. Every decision they made, every delay, every miscalculated launch, was another breadcrumb pointing toward opportunities I could seize. I refined my tactics quietly, adjusting pitches and proposals to exploit those subtle gaps they had left unguarded. There was something delicious about watching them stumble, knowing it was not through malice, but through careful observation and patient preparation. I sometimes imagined their boardroom faces frozen in disbelief, but only in whispered thoughts, letting the anticipation grow without a need for outward gloating. Meanwhile, my team thrived under this atmosphere of quiet triumph. Small celebrations for secured contracts, brief jokes about the absurdity of the industry, and shared coffees on late nights created a culture of understated resilience. I noticed how the environment of quiet achievement motivated everyone, how the rhythm of small victories built momentum. Each new client was more than revenue. It was a psychological win, proof that diligence, patience, and strategy could quietly dismantle assumptions. I even chuckled at how something as mundane as a client meeting could feel like a victory parade, an irony that my old colleagues would have failed to appreciate. The most exhilarating moment came when we landed a particularly high-profile client, one that had previously been exclusively tied to my old company. The call confirming the agreement had a hum of subtle celebration. We didn't need fanfare, just a quiet acknowledgement of progress. It felt almost surreal, like tasting a dessert you had been promised but never expected. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the distant city hum, feeling the satisfaction settle softly in my chest. My journey from being dismissed to quietly outmaneuvering my former employer had begun to bear fruit, and each new step was sweeter than the last. I also learned to savor the subtleties. A competitor's hesitation during a negotiation, a delayed response to a market shift, or even an accidental oversight in their outreach. Each detail became a piece of the puzzle, a chance to refine my strategy. There was an almost meditative rhythm to it, an ASMR-like quality in monitoring their movements while quietly strengthening my own position. This slow dance of observation, adjustment, and small victories built a momentum that was both thrilling and satisfying. By the end of that phase, I understood the power of quiet, calculated influence. The company that had once dismissed me now found itself subtly reacting to the moves of the very person they had undervalued. I allowed myself a brief smile as I closed my laptop for the night, listening to the distant hum of the city and the soft hiss of my heater. The satisfaction wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was profound, a soft, simmering triumph that whispered of the larger victories yet to come. The taste of quiet revenge, I realized, was far sweeter than any instant gratification could ever be. Expansion was intoxicating. I started acquiring key partners and strategic assets, not with a dramatic announcement, but quietly, deliberately, like a gardener planting seeds that would bloom long before anyone noticed. Each acquisition felt like adding a brushstroke to a canvas I had been painting in secret for years. Our team grew, new faces bringing fresh energy, new ideas, and occasionally, a touch of chaos that was funnier than it was alarming. I would joke to the team about how our tiny empire was slowly creeping into the world's blind spots, like a cat stretching lazily across the sunlit floor, unnoticed but entirely present. With each expansion, my confidence blossomed. I was no longer the cautious observer or the fledgling entrepreneur. I was a commander orchestrating a symphony of operations, deals, and alliances. Financial reports, marketing strategies, and logistics all became familiar instruments, producing a quiet music of success. The hum of the office, the click-clack of keyboards, the faint aroma of coffee and printer ink, it all felt like a reassuring rhythm. It was the subtle satisfaction of watching a carefully laid plan take shape, each note in harmony with my vision. At the same time, I remained vigilant. Growth brought challenges, and I learned quickly that momentum could be fragile. Supply chains faltered, partnerships needed delicate handling, and unforeseen obstacles appeared like sudden gusts of wind testing the stability of our foundation. But I had learned patience and subtlety from observing my former company. I handled each situation with measured calm, quietly correcting course without ever raising alarms. Sometimes, when a problem was particularly absurd, I would mutter a joke under my breath about the universe enjoying its sense of irony, and the team would chuckle softly, the tension easing like sunlight through blinds. One of the most rewarding aspects of this phase was seeing my old team members flourish in our fold. People who had been overlooked or undervalued found a space to grow, their talents nurtured and appreciated. Watching them succeed in ways they had imagined was like tending a garden that had once been neglected. There was pride, joy, and yes, a subtle thrill in knowing that these same talents had been ignored before. Each achievement by my team was a quiet vindication, a soft celebration of collective resilience and ingenuity. We also began implementing innovations that set us apart. Small improvements in processes, creative marketing approaches, and unique client engagement strategies slowly built a reputation of reliability and observing the ripple effect in the industry was satisfying, like watching footprints appear in sand, small but undeniable, marking a path that others would follow, often unknowingly influenced by our subtle leadership. Occasionally, I chuckled at a minor blunder from my old company, realizing they were unwittingly validating our superiority, one misstep at a time. By the end of this stage, the scope of our operations was expanding faster than I had dared imagine. Each day brought incremental victories and subtle advantages, building a momentum that felt both thrilling and serene. I would sit late at night in my office, listening to the faint city hum and the occasional distant siren, feeling the quiet power of what we had accomplished. My plan had matured from scattered notes into a living, breathing enterprise, quietly asserting itself in a world that had once dismissed me. And I realized, with a soft, satisfied smile, that the apex was still ahead, the culmination of years of careful observation, patience, and understated strategy. The quiet thrill of control, the subtle satisfaction of progress, and the gentle hum of a team moving in harmony with my vision became my lullaby. Success, I discovered, was most satisfying when it unfolded slowly, deliberately, and just out of sight of those who had doubted you. The taste of triumph was richer for its patience, like chocolate melting slowly on the tongue, leaving a lingering sweetness that promised even more to come. The day I walked into that industry conference and saw them again, I almost didn't recognize the faces of my former colleagues. They were confident, polished, and utterly unaware that the incompetent person they had dismissed now sat at the helm of a company that was quietly eclipsing theirs. The moment was surreal, almost cinematic. The soft hum of conversation, the clicking of shoes on polished floors, the faint scent of coffee and cologne. But my focus was sharp, observant, and quietly amused. I let a subtle, private smile curl at the corner of my lips, savoring the irony as one might savor a particularly fine dessert. As we exchanged formal pleasantries, I noticed the small hesitations, the micro-expressions betraying surprise and uncertainty. Their smiles were polite but strained, their eyes flicking ever so briefly to my company badge. Every gesture, every word, every subtle glance became part of a mental record I filed away, appreciating the delicate dance of recognition and disbelief. It was a moment of quiet, almost ASMR-like intensity, the kind that settles softly in the chest, like the gentle brushing of silk against skin. I could almost hear the unspoken thoughts between them, a silent "how did this happen" lingering in the air, and I allowed myself a tiny internal chuckle. Throughout the day, I moved with ease among the crowd, making connections, exchanging ideas, and demonstrating the quiet competence that had once been dismissed. Each handshake was firm but polite, each conversation purposeful, every interaction a subtle reminder that I had grown, adapted, and evolved. Watching their reactions, I realized how power had shifted, not in a dramatic, confrontational way, but in the silent, undeniable influence of capability and preparation. It was a satisfying revelation. Triumph didn't always require spectacle. Sometimes, it unfolded in quiet, confident poise. Back at the conference room later, I engaged in discussions about market trends and potential collaborations. They listened, occasionally interjecting with tentative points, but it was clear that their tone had shifted from authority to curiosity, their confidence tempered by the subtle weight of my presence. I noted every nuance, each hesitation, every subtle sign of recalibration. There was a rhythm to it, a delicate play of influence that reminded me of chess or a well-conducted orchestra. I even allowed myself a tiny joke under my breath, comparing the situation to an old TV show they'd all loved, funny, absurd, and entirely private. By the end of the day, I felt a quiet satisfaction unlike anything I had experienced before. The subtle power dynamics, the understated acknowledgement of my ascent, and the soft thrill of unspoken vindication combined into a rich, internal hum of accomplishment. My old colleagues had seen me, truly seen me, for the first time, not as a former subordinate, but as a capable, deliberate force in the industry. It was a private victory, soft and unassuming, yet profoundly satisfying. Walking back to my hotel that evening, the city lights shimmering like scattered stars on asphalt, I allowed myself a quiet moment to reflect. The path had been long, the steps painstaking, and the journey full of small victories that had accumulated into this moment. And yet, the greatest triumph wasn't just in being recognized, it was in the journey itself, the transformation from dismissal to quiet dominance. I breathed in the cool night air, letting it wash over me, carrying away the residue of past doubts. The future stretched ahead like an open road, promising opportunities, challenges, and victories yet to come, each one an invitation to continue the delicate, satisfying dance of influence, strategy, and subtle, unspoken power. The quiet work of dismantling their market dominance began subtly, without a single dramatic announcement or confrontation. I focused on strategic pressure points, undercutting their offers just enough to sway clients, introducing innovations that made our services more appealing, and fostering relationships with partners who had long felt overlooked by my former company. Each move was deliberate, measured, almost surgical in its precision, like a composer arranging notes for maximum emotional impact. The thrill wasn't in chaos or spectacle, it was in the slow, satisfying rhythm of progress. I remember one particularly ironic moment when a former colleague reached out, casually inquiring about collaboration, completely unaware that the company they once led was now struggling to retain clients. I smiled to myself, letting a quiet chuckle escape, soft, private, almost ASMR-like in its subtlety. I offered advice and support with all the politeness of a friend, never revealing the full extent of our advantage. Watching them navigate this shifting landscape, unaware of the magnitude of their miscalculation, was a strangely sweet sensation, a gentle vindication that required no fanfare. Our team, of course, celebrated quietly. Milestones were acknowledged with coffee toasts, whispered congratulations, and small jokes about our secret empire that no one outside the office would ever understand. Each achievement, no matter how incremental, strengthened the sense of collective accomplishment. There was a soft rhythm to our progress, the click of keyboards, the shuffle of reports, the hum of the office air conditioning, each sound a subtle accompaniment to our growing success. It was gratifying to see not only our company but each individual flourish under this shared mission, their talents nurtured and fully realized for the first time. Meanwhile, I maintained an almost meditative awareness of the larger strategy. Every client interaction, every market shift, every minor adjustment by our competitors was noted, catalogued, and used to refine our approach. The process was deeply satisfying, almost hypnotic, like watching a slow-motion chain reaction unfold in precise alignment with months and years of careful preparation. It reminded me that true power often manifests quietly, like the soft glow of a sunrise before anyone notices its arrival. Occasionally, I'd allow myself a light-hearted thought about the poetic justice of the situation, imagining the subtle disbelief that would ripple through my old company once our full influence became undeniable. By the end of this phase, the pattern was clear. My former company was reacting, adjusting, and often stumbling, while we moved with quiet confidence and careful precision. The taste of victory was soft, lingering, and almost sensual in its subtlety. I allowed myself to appreciate it fully, taking a moment in my office to breathe deeply, to listen to the gentle hum of activity, and to savor the sensation of watching a plan once imagined in secret unfold into reality. There was no need for drama or spectacle. The satisfaction came from the quiet knowledge that we were now shaping the landscape on our terms. I began to realize that the culmination of this journey wasn't simply revenge, it was transformation. Every action, every subtle maneuver, every whisper of strategy had contributed not only to the company's growth, but to my own evolution. I had become someone who could influence, innovate, and inspire, all while remaining poised and composed. And though my old colleagues would one day witness the fruits of these efforts, the true victory was mine to savor quietly, like a soft lullaby that drifts through the mind just before sleep. The path had been arduous, but the rewards were profound. Patience, strategy, and subtle influence, all converging into a moment of understated triumph. Sitting in my corner office, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I finally allowed myself to take it all in. The city below pulsed with life, unaware that its skyline was being quietly influenced by the work of someone they had once dismissed as useless. I could hear the soft hum of computers, the faint murmur of my team collaborating, the occasional click of a coffee cup against a saucer, sounds that had become the lullaby of my triumph. There was a gentle rhythm to it all, an ASMR-like satisfaction in knowing that every decision, every late night, every meticulous note and observation had led to this moment. I thought back to that day of dismissal, the sting of those words echoing like a phantom, "You're not competent enough." It seemed almost absurd now, almost laughable, as I surveyed the empire quietly built from my careful strategies, alliances, and unwavering patience. Each acquisition, each partnership, each subtle maneuver had been a brushstroke in the painting of my revenge, not brutal or vengeful, but precise, elegant, and undeniably effective. I allowed a private smile, letting the soft joy curl gently in my chest, a feeling far richer than any sudden, dramatic vindication could provide. Meeting after meeting unfolded smoothly, each one a testament to the growth of the company and the competence of the team. I watched people I had recruited, nurtured, and trusted shine in their roles, executing strategies with precision and creativity. There was an undeniable pride in observing them succeed, the knowledge that our collective effort had reshaped not only our own trajectories but also the balance of influence in the industry. I felt a quiet warmth in knowing that talent, when recognized and cultivated, could surpass even the most entrenched institutions. Occasionally, I made a light joke to the team about how useless employees sometimes just need better timing and a little strategic patience. The laughter was soft, comforting, a reminder that even in success, humanity and humor had their place. I also reflected on the subtle poetry of the journey. Revenge had not been loud or chaotic. It had been measured, quiet, and patient. Each small victory had been savored, each tiny step toward influence appreciated for its delicate balance of risk and reward. My old company, despite their previous confidence, had been outmaneuvered without spectacle, subtly, almost imperceptibly, a lesson in the understated power of strategy and perseverance. The satisfaction of knowing this was deeply personal, like a soft whisper of triumph echoing in the corners of my consciousness. Now, sitting on the CEO chair of the very corporation that had once dismissed me, I realized the true significance of the journey. It wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about discovering my own capacity for resilience, creativity, and leadership. Each challenge faced, each failure endured, each quiet observation made had contributed to a transformation far greater than simple revenge. I felt the soft thrill of accomplishment, tempered with humility, a soothing awareness that I had not only rebuilt my life but elevated it to heights I had only dared dream of in my darkest moments. As the day wound down, I allowed myself a few moments of stillness. The city lights began to twinkle as dusk fell, the soft hum of activity gradually fading into a more peaceful cadence. I leaned back, letting the quiet satisfaction wash over me, a gentle ASMR-like embrace of triumph and serenity. The journey had been long, meticulous, and sometimes lonely, but the rewards were profound. I had transformed from someone dismissed and underestimated into a leader, a strategist, and quietly, a victor in a game I had mastered without theatrics or grandstanding. The soft glow of achievement settled around me, and I let myself simply be, content, accomplished, and quietly triumphant. Now, as the day gently fades into night, imagine yourself settling into a quiet space, a soft blanket draped over your shoulders, the hum of the city outside easing into a gentle lull. The journey has been long, full of challenges, small victories, and subtle triumphs. But now it's time to let all of that energy soften and dissolve. Feel the slow, steady rhythm of your breath, the gentle rise and fall of your chest, like waves lapping softly against the shore. Each inhale brings clarity. Each exhale releases tension. Picture the warmth of the sun slipping behind distant buildings, leaving the sky awash in muted colors, a delicate palette of evening light. The bustling sounds of the day gradually fade into a distant murmur, replaced by the comforting whisper of silence. Let your mind wander through this quiet landscape, knowing that every small action you have taken, every careful step, has led you here, safe, capable, and in control. There is a quiet pride in the gentle unfolding of progress, a soothing reassurance that patience and persistence always leave their mark. As you sink deeper into this calm, imagine the soft glow of achievement surrounding you, like a halo of gentle warmth. Each reflection of past struggles and victories blends into a tranquil tapestry, each memory a thread of soft gold. You are the quiet architect of your own path, the observer and participant, the planner and dreamer. The gentle hum of life continues around you, but you are cocooned in the serenity of accomplishment. Feel your body relax fully, each muscle softening, each thought slowing, as if the world itself is exhaling with you. Let the subtle satisfaction of your journey settle like a whisper on your skin, leaving behind a tender warmth that lingers and reassures. Close your eyes and let this feeling drift deeper, carrying you toward a night of restful, undisturbed sleep. Everything is exactly as it should be, peaceful, complete, and quietly triumphant.